It's 2025. It's been a full year since we've talked about the Sonic movies. Okay, you thought that wasn't funny. All right. So anyways, yes, it's been a couple weeks since the third movie came out. So I was like, can we finally talk about this movie? It feels like in some parts of the internet, it's like when you talk about the Sonic movies, it's like Lord Voldemort. It's he who shall not be named. At this point, if you're watching this video, I think we can talk about some spoilers. There's a lot of question marks going forward for the Sonic franchise. As a matter of fact, there's some new information about the new Sonic movie 4, which, yes, is already confirmed for a spring 2027 release, which was exclusively obtained by Variety. So we already know Paramount is seeing that 86% certified fresh Rotten Tomatoes score plus the 96% audience score, and they're like, yo, we're ready to make more and more Sonic movies until this thing fails. The box office is also looking really strong for Sonic Movie 3 as well, to go along with the solid reviews. This tweet right here says Sonic Movie 3 is getting ready to become the highest grossing Sonic film in the US box office faster than anticipated after a record second Wednesday. It has already hit $160 million in the US, which is $31 million ahead of Sonic Movie 2 at the same point. So it's on course to become the highest grossing installment of the franchise this weekend already. They're also saying that it's potentially eyeing higher highs now, which is eyeing potentially 245 million to 270 million in the US, which would be absolutely insane. The only thing that could stop Sonic Movie 3 is Sonic Movie 3, because it's just been confirmed that Sonic 3 is releasing on digital platforms on January 21st, 1 month after its theatrical release. So literally in 3 weeks, we're gonna get this on DVD already, which would be kind of a shame because it feels like they're kind of sabotaging their own box office performance, which, hey, listen, I don't know how these things work. I don't work at the companies. Maybe they have a better plan than we do, but 1 month after the movie comes out, it's coming to DVD, and people are a little bit confused by this. But regardless, it looks like this is going to be the most successful installment in the franchise, definitely critically, but even financially. So this is a big W. So what comes next? Because like I said before, there are a lot of questions with these Sonic movies, a lot of unanswered questions, and it's pretty exciting with the road ahead. It feels like a lot of the pressing questions about Sonic Movie 4 definitely all go hand in hand. It's almost like this domino effect. I guess where we start off with is the addition of Amy Rose and Metal Sonic and what happens with Dr. Eggman. All of this stuff is going to be relevant to the new plotline because in the games, Metal Sonic is obviously created by Dr. Eggman. He's his finest creation. So the big problem with all this is that at the end of Sonic Movie 3, Eggman allegedly dies. Well, you know, it's alleged because he also allegedly died at the end of 2. Perhaps Eggman dying is the new South Park You Killed Kenny. At the end of every single Sonic movie project going forward, Dr. Eggman is going to die and then somehow return in the next episode. But with Metal Sonic coming to the films, it's like, how do you do Metal Sonic, especially all those random Metal Sonics that they created? I kind of want to figure out what the hell that's all about. There's so many different Metal Sonics. There's so many questions about this post-credit scene. It was actually that good. But how do you do a Metal Sonic without Dr. Eggman? There's certainly a lot of ideas and things that they could do. I'm sure Agent Stone can take over as Eggman, or potentially Eggman somehow snuck away and created an army of Metal Sonics prior to him dying. Certainly a lot of things you could do, but it looks like there's our first sign of willingness from Jim Carrey to return to Sonic Movie 4. According to an article from Sonic Stadium, it says, breaking, in an interview with the Japanese news site Cinema Today, Jim Carrey has confirmed that he is open to coming back for hashtag Sonic Movie 4 and that he's not retiring, but he's power napping between projects. Let's take a listen for ourselves.
I'm definitely open. I'm open to the idea. And generally they come to me with the next idea, and if I go, oh, that sounds fun, you know?
Okay.
Then I'll do it. I don't feel locked to anything in life unless it's something that interests me.
That's a good mentality.
I certainly love this crew. I love this gang that makes these movies, and I love the fans. I think there's a lot of really great energy around it, and great responses.
Okay.
And the fans jump in there and go like, how about if you do this?
There it is. So there it is. Obviously, I've said this, a bunch of times over the last couple of months leading up to the release of the movie, but it's like we kind of do have this Jim Carrey problem. He's the main antagonist of the Sonic franchise, Dr. Eggman. It's a really, really big void to fill, especially when you consider how much of a star he is as an actor. It's hard to replace him as an actor, 1, but also 2, Dr. Eggman is kind of like the engine that makes almost every single Sonic story work. He's behind almost every single plot. Now, the movie studio clearly has flexibility to do what they want, and I'm sure maybe even some of them would be up to the challenge of telling their own unique story, which it seems like Sonic Movie 4 will definitely do that. But right now, we're kind of held hostage by Jim Carrey. It's like, will he return? Will he not return? It's always going to be ambiguous, and it's going to be something we speculate until probably like the year the movie releases. So we'll be up in the air, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. Personally, I do obviously hope he returns. And one thing I think a hurdle for the Sonic movies is How will a movie without him be received? Obviously, Sonic fans will go to the movie to watch Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Metal Sonic, etc. But the general audience, the people that specifically go to the movies to like watch Jim carry and say that he carries the films, what are they going to think about it? So it's not a problem per se. Obviously, the team will be up to the task, but it will be a challenge for them to see, you know, what type of story they can craft and can they reach that same audience that they were able to reach with the first 3 movies with the star power of Jim Carrey. Let's not forget that you also have a lot of people that truly love Eggman's send-off, and maybe even some fans are ready to see maybe what these movies could look like without him, because he had a perfect ending to his arc in the first 3 movies. So it's like, would that reduce from his sacrifice? Some people do think that. Personally, I don't really care. I would like to actually see him return regardless, either way, because I feel like we need an Eggman. The bar was also set really high by movie 3. It's got the best reviews in the franchise. Also, it's looking to make the most money. So it's like, potentially what comes after movie 3 could always be living in the shadow. Get it? Okay. Speaking of Shadow the Hedgehog, after seeing the second post-credit scene, we know that he's alive. So it's like, you know, there's a lot of questions to ask about him, but I think there's nothing really relevant or new to talk about with respect to that. So we'll save that for a future video when talking about Shadow. But let's move on to the new information about Amy Rose in Sonic Movie 4. Another major unanswered question about something confirmed for Sonic Movie 4 is Amy Rose. We know that she's going to be in the movie, but it's going to be very tricky as to how they handle her. As you know, Amy Rose is a character that has undergone a lot of radical changes throughout her history as a character in the franchise. She was first introduced into the franchise as a character who was like a Sonic fangirl. She was always trying to go on dates with Sonic and whatever. And then as she's progressed into the franchise, she's become more mature and kind of grown into her own role as like one of the main characters. She goes through several arcs, like in Sonic Adventure, she has her independent arc. And by Sonic Frontiers, she's kind of dropped the fangirl stuff and she's more of just like a member of the team, and they kind of stripped that away from her character. So it's kind of been this thing that's been a heated discussion amongst fans for a very long time. So how Paramount chooses to go about introducing her into the films is going to be very interesting to see. Which version of Amy Rose will we see in Sonic Movie 3? I think it's going to be a pretty big challenge for the team, because I think one way or another, there's some people like one interpretation of the character, there's other people that like another interpretation of the character. Will it be more in line with like her pre-generations portrayal, or more of like her modern Frontiers portrayal? So the writers for the Sonic movies have actually talked about some of the challenges that Sonic will face. They also talk about a lot of other interesting things. So let's talk about what Pat Casey and Josh Miller said about Sonic Movie 4. So first they talk about Eggman. They said, so Ivo's fate in Sonic Movie 3 seems a little more definitive this time around than it was in 2. What can you tell me about coming up with that ending for him in this film in comparison to the previous 2? Josh Miller says, obviously we can't talk about what is or isn't in the future, but I think it was the idea. If it had to be an ending, what would be an ending that felt right, but obviously could maybe not be an ending? Pat Casey said, we knew there was a very real possibility that this might be his last one, and it might be for real, but we wanted to make it a satisfying capper for him. So if this was the last we saw of Ivo, he had a good, complete story with a real ending that feels satisfying and felt earned. Josh Miller says, but we hope it's all not. Recent news hopefully proves that that's not the case. Pat Casey also says, I will say he's definitely dead unless he survives somehow. They said, that's perfect. Leave me guessing one way or the other. I think it's an earned ending one way or the other, but again, fingers crossed Jim wants to come back for 4. Josh Miller says, we always know. Remember, Neil Moritz is producing these movies, and he also does Fast and Furious, which has definitely demonstrated that life will find a way. If you make enough movies, that's a reason for fans to keep coming out. Well said. So now they talk about Amy Rose. It said Amy Rose nearly had a bigger role in the new movie. The question says, so turning to the post credits, I'm also really excited that we got Amy Rose involved. And I know that you guys have been keen on bringing her in as well. What was it like when you got the opportunity to do that? Did you pitch that to Jeff on the first movie, as you found you were pulling from Adventure for this one, that this was the right time to do it? Josh Miller said, I think maybe Amy came up for a brief moment on 2, just where your blue sky. What are all the things that could happen? And it's kind of been the same story with all sequels, is you don't want to do Amy dirty by having her show up and kind of barely be in the movie. Pat Casey said, we talked long and hard about including her in the body of Sonic 3, but then ultimately realized there's too much going on already, and we didn't want to give her a short shrift. We didn't want to crowd Shadow out, and we also knew a lot of fans who would love to see Amy, like girl fans in particular. I've got little nieces. Ever since they discovered Amy existed, they've been asking me where Amy is. They won't leave me alone, so we're definitely been like, we gotta get Amy in here soon. Josh says, yeah, I can't even necessarily say that we pitched her. I think it's always felt in some way almost obvious who the character should be that gets introduced in the post-credit scene, to the point where it's hard to remember even the first conversation about it, because it kind of feels like it was always the plan. Like the moment Tails wasn't going to be one of the main characters in Sonic 1, it was like, well, we'll tease him at the end, let fans know that the franchise is going to keep expanding. Pat Casey says, including her in the franchise opened some things up because Sonic went from a completely lonely little kid and he gained a family. He gained friends and teammates and arch foes. But what's going to be the biggest challenge he's faced so far? Girls, he's growing up. And then Josh Miller says, our hedgehog's growing up. So moving on to movie 4, Casey and Miller are thrilled to already be working on Sonic the Hedgehog 4. The question says, so the timing of this interview is fortuitous. By the way, as we got the news like an hour ago that Sonic 4 is already set up for a release. Obviously, you guys really can't talk much about it, but I'd love to hear what it's like to continue working on the franchise, knowing Paramount is confident before this one has even come out. Pat Casey says, it's great to be part of a successful franchise. We built 2 movies. Part 3 will hopefully be a hit, and we just hope that the franchise continues to grow and expand the audience. It's been the same team on all these films. It's like a family thing, and it's exciting to see it grow. When the first movie was announced, no one gave us a chance. We were a bit of a laughingstock, so it's really gratifying to have gotten the franchise to this point. When asked about characters that they want to see in the movie, they said Big the Cat is on the top of their wish list, of course, because Big is an absolute GOAT. And they also talked about the potential of going to other worlds, because it feels like that was something that was maybe going to be a possibility for the end of Sonic 3. Like, I thought that's where they were going to go with it for post-credit scene. So when they were asked about space and different planets, they said, we almost put a sequence like that into Sonic 2 and ended up not having space for it. But we definitely know that there are other worlds for these more fantastical zones, and we would like to see it. So we assume the audience would like to see it as well. For Sonic 3, the story was all about this military stuff and inherently earthbound, but possibly in the future, we might get some more fantastic places. So potentially in future movies, we may be seeing different planets, maybe spin-off projects as well. The earliest breadcrumbs and earliest details of Sonic Movie 4 have emerged. And like I said before, there's several unanswered questions. You know, we're getting some direction. As far as Jim Carrey goes, it doesn't really sound like a guy who wants to retire, especially if the price is right. It seems like they're paying this guy like $12 to $15 million a film. So I think as long as the price is right, he'll come back for at least Sonic Movie 4. Potentially we'll get a saga. They'll do like 6 films or something like that. But that's kind of where the fate of the new films rests. It's like, okay, if Jim Carrey returns, then we kind of have a logical explanation for where Metal Sonic comes from. Amy Rose, I mean, I feel like she definitely comes from a different planet. She's not just like chilling in New York. She also has all these fighting abilities already, so it feels like she's kind of battle tested. So it's gonna be very interesting to see what her dynamic is. Her original game, Sonic CD, she was rescued by Sonic, but in her introduction in Sonic Movie 4, she was actually rescuing Sonic. So is she coming into this film as a more static character? We'll have to wait and see. And Metal Sonic, what's up with that? There was a bunch of different Metal Sonics. Is there like an OG Metal Sonic, like the main one? Is he gonna turn into Neo Metal Sonic? All these questions remain unanswered, but hopefully some of these interviews and stuff have kind of turned your head in the right direction and give you some ideas as to what to expect. In a way, Sonic Movie 4 might be the most pivotal film in the entire franchise's history. Probably as important as maybe the first one was, because the first one is kind of the thing that kickstarted all this. Without the first one, we don't have the second and the third. We knew the third one was definitely going to be a smash hit because they were finally leaning into all the Sonic elements. Also, they're piggybacking off of the best Sonic story yet, which was Sonic Adventure 2. We kind of knew that this one was going to be an absolute banger with the introduction of Shadow, but I think what I'm most excited for about Sonic Movie 4 is that we're going to get a completely original story for the most part. I mean, like Sonic CD, let's be honest, it's a 16-bit Genesis game. It has nowhere near the level of depth as a story as Sonic Adventure 2 has. The thing about Sonic Movie 4, it's going to be a completely brand new story that is not afraid to lean into the Sonic elements. So we're not going to know the exact plot of the story like we kind of did with SA2 going into this movie. Yes, Sonic Movie 3 is different, but I feel like the core structure of it is pretty similar in principle. Kind of starts the same and ends the same. So like I said earlier, Sonic Movie 4, probably the most pivotal film in the franchise. They could potentially be losing their biggest star, but he could also be returning. We have a brand new fan favorite character, which we're not sure how she's going to be written, because that's something that Sonic fans will be watching very closely. And we have a new antagonist in Metal Sonic. How are they going to handle him? Because it seems to be all over the place and we have no idea. It's going to be a wild couple of years, so buckle up for the ride.